Pyongyang test fires another ballistic missile and it fails, but warns of a nuclear test at any time. Hello, I'm Nathan King in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Hello again. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea is warning it will carry out a nuclear test at any time and any location set up by its leadership. Tensions on the Korean Peninsula have been escalating for weeks, with some indications the DPRK could be preparing to conduct its sixth nuclear test. A U.S. Navy strike group led by the aircraft carrier, the USS Carl Vinson, is now in the region taking part in naval exercises. And in a recent interview on the CBS News here in the US President Donald Trump discussed the threat and his views about China's response.
I will tell you, a man that I've gotten to like and respect, the president of China, President Xi, I believe has been putting pressure on him also, but so far, perhaps nothing's happened, and perhaps it has. This was a small missile. This was not a big missile. This was not a nuclear test, which he was expected to do 3 days ago. We'll see what happens.
You say not happy. What does that mean?
I would not be happy. If he does a nuclear test, I will not be happy.
And on Friday, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson told members of the United Nations Security Council in New York that the situation with the DPRK is now at a critical point. Let's take a listen.
For too long, the international community has been reactive in addressing North Korea. Those days must come to an end. Failing to act now on the most pressing security issue in the world may bring catastrophic consequences.
We urge the DPRK to stop its nuclear and missile development activities, come back to its commitment of denuclearization, and honor its obligations. We also call on the other parties concerned to demonstrate particular wisdom, make a political decision, and work constructively together towards the denuclearization of the peninsula.
So a lot to cover, and joining us now to cover it is Yonho Kim. He's a senior researcher with the U.S. Korea Institute at the Johns Hopkins University. Also with us is Sourabh Gupta. He is a resident senior fellow at the Institute for China-America Studies. And from Beijing, we are joined by Qinduo Xu. He is a political analyst for China Radio International. And Jonah Blank here is a senior political scientist with the global policy think tank, the RAND Corporation here in DC. Thanks, all four of you, for joining us. Yonho Kim, can we start with you? And before I actually have a question, I want to read the latest, because Donald Trump made even more news today, the US president. He said this in an interview with Bloomberg: if it would be appropriate for me to meet with him, I would be honored to do it. And he's talking about Kim Jong-un there. We just saw the aircraft carrier as well in place. Which Donald Trump should we believe in this tensions on the Korean Peninsula, or is it both?
I think, as we predicted, he is so unpredictable. So that's the way we could describe the whole situation. And at first, I thought when we were told that the Trump administration concluded that their North Korea policy would be so-called maximum pressure and engagement. The shift from maximum pressure to engagement would take a relatively very long time, I thought. But obviously, Trump is talking about meeting with Kim Jong-un, probably with hamburger on the table. So
that was something he said in the campaign, right?
Right. So I think this is another aspect of his unpredictability and his negotiation skills.
It's not the first time he's actually given sort of empathy to Kim Jong-un. Sourabh, let's listen to this before I ask you the next question.
People are saying, is he sane? I have no idea. I can tell you this, and a lot of people don't like when I say it, but he was a young man of 26 or 27 when he took over from his father, when his father died. He's dealing with obviously very tough people, in particular the generals and others. And at a very young age, he was able to assume power. A lot of people, I'm sure, tried to take that power away, whether it was his uncle or anybody else. And he was able to do it. So obviously, he's a pretty smart cookie.
Pretty smart cookie. I don't think I've ever heard language said that about a DPRK leader from an American leader. Sourabh, what's your take on this sudden outreach to Kim with the Trump administration, given the tensions that we've been seeing on the Korean Peninsula in the last several weeks?
The outreach needs to be done in a structured way. It cannot be one day I'm going to put pressure, tomorrow I'm going to engage, again go back to pressure, engage. It gets hard to figure out where exactly the administration wants to go, and it gets hard for other foreign interlocutors to also understand, including Kim, as understanding where Donald Trump is going with all this. That having been said, I would make two statements out here, both positive. The first statement is that what he said is not untrue. Kim did come into power at a very young age, and he has... But
it's the empathy part that is quite incredible.
I'll come to the empathy part. Yeah, it is incredible. But he's obviously, it's a difficult transition in North Korea, and Kim Jong-un has been brutal in that respect. The other part I would like to focus on is that oftentimes for too long it's difficult to get word out from the mouth of an American president that I'm going to engage a rogue regime. It's just not politically right to say that in Washington, D.C., and everybody would jump on him. Donald Trump has created political space for himself to be able to engage the Kim Jong-un in a structured context if he does want to. And so from that perspective, it's useful. But obviously from the empathy part, it is quite a shock from that perspective.
Qinduo in Beijing, a lot of the South Korean newspapers this morning are waking up with the same, scratching their heads as we are about that sort of olive branch to meet. What would China make of it? And also the praise that's being heaped on China for their role in reigning in the DPRK and working with the US is something very new that obviously China is getting used to too, correct?
That's true. Like for China, China is trying very hard on one side to impose the sanctions, actually is tightening sanctions against North Korea. But at the same time, Beijing understands it's impossible to resolve the issue simply relying on sanctions, however severe it is, however pressure there is on the North Korean side. You have to understand, there's a concern from North Korean side. That concern is about their existence, about the security concern, the concern about the regime change. So, you have to take that into consideration if there's engagement. But of course, if you listen to what the President Trump has said about meeting Kim Jong-un, I think that's very encouraging. Remember, how sensitive the North Korean leader is to words, especially words personal about the leaders. Remember a couple of years ago, there was a movie in Hollywood, mocking the leader, and then there's repercussions.
Yes,
so
Red
if
Dawn,
there are some nice words for the president, that might create some very positive atmosphere for a possible, for however remote the possibility might be a meeting between the President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. That would be very helpful, I would say.
You just suggested that there were personality similarities between the two leaders, which was interesting. Jonah Blank, is Trump the sort of person who could do this, the sort of throwing the Hail Mary pass, do you think? We were just hearing from Beijing that, and here, that no other leader has done this at a time of crisis. The last U.S. leader, I think, to go to the DPRK was Secretary of State Madeleine Albright back in 2000. So, do you think that's what's needed in this sort of?
Well, President Obama did put on the table his willingness to meet with Kim Jong-un at the end of a negotiation as the ceiling point. So he was quite open about his willingness, at least in theory, to negotiate or to seal a negotiation. But from his standpoint, this is what seals the deal rather than what starts the deal. What's unusual here is the suggestion that there might be a top leadership negotiation at the very beginning without underlings having hashed out any of the details.
Jonah, that's a very good point, because U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said at that meeting on Friday in the UN Security Council that the U.S. is not going to start negotiating about negotiations back to the negotiating table. And Sean Spicer, the White House spokesperson, came out straight after Trump made those comments and said, a lot must happen before we have those talks. So that was a very good point. But Yonho, we're not looking at this in a vacuum, are we? Because these comments come on a day when it looks like the Defense Department of the US have said that the THAAD anti-ballistic missile defense system controversially deployed to South Korea is now operational. So you have carrot and a very big stick. And also, it's not popular, is it? Let's listen to Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, speaking in the council at the UN on Friday.
I want to reiterate that China firmly opposes the deployment of the U.S. THAAD anti-missile system in the Republic of Korea. This move has undermined the strategic security of China and other countries in the region. It has also damaged trust and cooperation among parties involved in the Korean Peninsula issue. It will neither help nor push forward the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, nor help ensure long-term stability. We call on relevant parties to stop the deployment immediately.
Now, Yonho, obviously China's reservations about THAAD go beyond the strategic on the Korean Peninsula. They have problems with its radar. But increasingly, it seems, in the Republic of Korea, in the south, there are also problems with this deployment. Is that getting bigger and bigger as we hear these conflicting statements coming from Washington?
Yes, it suddenly became a huge controversial issue, especially when it comes to the presidential campaign.
Which we're very close to, right?
Right, but suddenly over the last week, the leading front-runner, Moon Jae-in, the candidate of Liberal Democratic Party, is expanding his lead over the second front-runner by 20% point. And this THAAD controversy, especially the comments by the President of the United States, is somehow boosting the front-runner's candidacy also, because Moon Jae-in has been arguing that the next government should be reviewing the decision of THAAD deployment from scratch, because he thinks there was some serious problem in the course of the decision making. So he wants to review the decision. And when the President of the United States, asking for paying the THAAD deployment.
That's right, that happened on Sunday. The US President said, oh, and by the way, the $1 billion it costs to install, ROK must pay for that. How did the average South Korean feel when they heard that?
Well, South Korean people, I would say, they're scratching their heads, asking whether the alliance is based on some kind of commercial or financial agreement. Usually, you conceive this kind of alliance based on trust. And there could be some financial disadvantage to a certain part, but it can be covered by your long-term trust relationship. And now we are talking about $1 billion, which is not a small amount of money. And it sounds a huge burden to the South Korean economy, which is struggling right now.
That's right, and he also called for a renegotiation of the free trade pact between the ROK and the US, which is only 5 years old. Suraj, let's try and move away from this and say, where do you think the US strategy is? Because we had this era of strategic patience of the Obama administration, which has been declared over. But do we have anything to replace it? Because there was a big review by the incoming Trump administration. But as yet, we have no document. We have no list of potential sanctions or any pathway to talks. What is it?
I think we do have a basic framework in which the Trump administration is moving on North Korea, following the policy review, which was itself a very broad document, or at least a broad interagency consultation process, and that involves, as has been reported, maximum pressure on the administration, on the Kim Jong-un regime, but also engagement of the Kim Jong-un regime. Now, it has not been given
sort of a peace, truth, strength, like Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, the main purpose out here is to bring qualitatively greater pressure and isolation using all tools possible on the Kim Jong-un regime so that he understands that he is cornered, and thereafter to have negotiations with him or discussions with him on a qualitatively different standing, which will enable him, which will see to it that he is probably chastened and that he will come up with compromises with regard to disarmament or, I mean, denuclearization. I think that's more of a pipe dream. But the point is there is value in this simply because if engagement and pressure can be structured correctly, there is a scope for having these all done at the negotiating table, and these can be carrots. It's a mix of carrots and sticks which can be withdrawn, and it'll have to be done with great deftness. But at this point in time, why we feel that, yes, we have this big policy, but at the same time, so what are the details? They haven't yet really fleshed out they've fleshed out the range of options, perhaps, but they've not decided which options they're going to execute at this point of time. They just have it on the table, and I'm just waiting for the Chinese, basically, to see how the Chinese can put greater pressure initially.